Welcome to Mission Advancement Summer Break Series. We're thrilled that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule this summer. Hopefully it's not too busy and you're getting some summer break time as well. We hope that this episode is meaningful to you and that we bring you a couple of tools along the way, or perhaps answer a question that's been on your mind. Thanks for joining us. Hey, welcome back to our summer break series. Here we go again. Break this, break that. Man, we've had about every kind of break that imaginable. Today I have with me Angel DeLeon, who leads our sales and marketing efforts, and Sarah Wise, who leads our Houston efforts and works stuff and sells stuff. What don't you do? Just about everything.
Does everything.
Anyway, but so glad the two of you joined us today. What is our topic? We are doing Break the Silence today. Break the silence. So, man, that could mean all kinds of things. I think from our standpoint, it means, what aren't we saying that are on people's minds that might be causing concern, might be causing worry, might be causing hesitation or reluctance to do the things that maybe they should be doing? And, oh, by the way, well done. All right. Break this. What comes to mind? What are some of those things that might be on hearts and minds right now that might slow the process? Let me go to Sarah first.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the economy and inflation, and are we going into a recession, and how that affects fundraising. And
is there a mind that's not thinking about that?
Right. Yeah, everybody's thinking about it. We're all feeling it. That's certainly something that I feel is coming from our clients right now.
That's great. I'm sure we'll expand on that as the time goes on. Angel, what else comes to mind?
Yeah, so we've all been in a situation where there's something obviously happening and no one wants to address it. It's awkward and everyone's wondering, when is somebody going to say something? I kind of feel like that's where we are right now. Everybody's talking about it, but some folks are sort of like, not sure how to deal with this. Yeah, I agree, Sarah. The economy, what's happening worldwide. I mean, world events everything's distracting right now. And everyone's wondering, is this the right time to do this or that? Regardless of what this or that is. It's sort of let's hit pause. And I don't know that that's a really healthy place for anyone to be.
But why do you think that is? Why do leaders of nonprofits especially sometimes hit that pause button when times get a little tough? I mean, what's going through their minds? And we've all dealt with clients wrestling with this. This is not the first time the economy has been through a stressful time. So, Sarah?
It's a good question. I think that in the nonprofit sector, there seems to be such a fear complex around so much. Fear of change, fear of growth, fear of asking for money, all of these things. And I think because in nonprofits we rely on philanthropy, I think a lot of people are hesitant because they're afraid to ask, the hard questions of donors, and they assume a lot of times that donors are thinking a certain way without even asking. So I think there's just a lot of that fear of everything, and perhaps maybe in the nonprofit sector too, we don't always get the resources and the professional development to get all of that knowledge and training and understanding of how to deal with these things. So I feel like sometimes we're always a few steps behind sometimes in those areas, and they just don't get those tools and resources, and so then they feel like they have to operate out of that fear complex all the time.
Agreed.
Maybe the term itself, nonprofit, is sort of a negative place to start, because it sort of suggests, nonprofit. And I think, to be fair to our friends out there that do this kind of work, and if you're a leader in a nonprofit organization, sometimes there's unrealistic expectations that are placed on them. There's a lot of pressure on those men and women out there to be successful with minimal resources many times, and they're finding themselves in this place where it freezes them. If I do anything and it doesn't work, it's going to reflect poorly. They have boards that are holding them accountable, and all those things matter. They're all variables that weigh into an already complicated situation for them. They're trying to make the best of it. It's just they're sort of stuck in that I'm not sure that I should do anything right now.
Yeah. I love that you said, sorry, Scott, I love that you said about nonprofit being a negative term. I'm like, yes, because I always tell people nonprofit is a tax designation, not a business strategy.
Exactly.
And so it's like, we're here to make
Yeah.
money. It's okay to be profitable, and because you get to put it back into your mission.
That's right.
So it's just so interesting where that, and I think it does kind of affect the mindset. I really
I've
do
been in
think
this
that-
industry
yeah.
for almost 40 years, and I've never thought about that term until you just raised it. And it's funny, we define this entire industry by what it's not. It's
Yeah,
not
that's a good
profit.
point.
You know, it's also not roast beef. So why don't we call it the not roast beef industry? You know, something like that. And yeah, why wouldn't it be defined by what it is, which are, you know, noble, worthy, life-changing missions or something like that? Interesting. Sorry, I know we digress around this issue. So the economy is the elephant in the room, I think, in every client organization that we're serving today. That it just can't help but be on people's minds. And I know the two of you have been in this industry a long time as well, decades. And you have been through this cycle before. Doesn't it seem, first of all, doesn't it seem like it's the same thing over again that we went through in 07, 08, and then back in 9/11, and then back in the 90s, and, you know, when there was recession times and things like that? I mean, doesn't it feel that way sometimes?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, yeah, I mean, I remember 9/11. Everyone was wondering what's going to happen. Does fundraising shut down? And in fact, it didn't. It did just fine. 08, every time there's an economic downturn that's caused by artificial or, you know, whatever the causes might be, there's a resilience that philanthropy has. And individuals that are philanthropic understand that probably more than ever, the reason for the existence of that nonprofit that they support is as compelling as it's ever been. And depending on what space they operate in, many times it will never be more compelling to a donor than it is during that time of difficulty.
It's really interesting to me how it seems like people have bad memories. Like they don't think about, like, we've been through, there's always something. And to me, there's always going to be something, a challenge, a big world event, something that's going on that's going to affect us and our mindset. But when is there not something going on is kind of my whole thing. And if your mission is urgent and compelling, that shouldn't stop you ever from talking to donors and not being afraid to just talk to donors and ask those questions. I think for some reason people just kind of get stuck and they forget that we've been through this, year after year, there's always something that's going on. So
And that's the part of it that kind of sticks in my mind. And it occurs to me, I know you guys are very familiar with the common turnover in the fundraising industry, right? Development directors don't typically serve in a role like that for decades, right? So all the people who we're working with today, the vast majority of them weren't in their roles 13, 14, 15 years ago, the last time we had a very hard dip into the economy. And board members of those organizations who were serving back then probably aren't on that organization's board, maybe not serving on boards today. So it's almost like it's a new class of students that have come in and they have to learn that process all over again.
Yeah. That's true. And I think our encouragement to folks that are in that space right now is during these times where everyone is sort of distracted with these, and maybe even some donors, going back to the basics. What are the things that matter most? So maybe it's an opportunity to build relationships. Maybe it's an opportunity to grow that donor in their understanding of the purpose of that mission like we've never done before. I think it creates opportunities for us and our colleagues out there to do that kind of thing, maybe even more intentionally than we've done them in the past.
I just remember what we said a couple years ago when the pandemic started and how we really leaned into all of our clients and our nonprofits that we work with and said, don't stop talking to your donors. Don't stop talking. And those that did and really leaned into that did wonderfully through that whole process, as hard as the pandemic has been for everyone, but they're thriving. And the ones who didn't, did suffer. And so, I kind of go back to that and say, remember just a couple of years ago when we were all scared to death about what that was going to happen, and we made it. So it's like we're going to make it again, and we just have to keep going and not be afraid to talk to our donors and don't make assumptions. I think a lot of times people just make assumptions and say, oh, well, we shouldn't talk to anybody right now.
Yeah.
And I just find that so interesting. Like, why not? Why wouldn't you just give them a call? So
That's right.
The pandemic is obviously still fresh in our minds. I guess technically it's still going on, but probably not quite as paralyzing as it was a few years ago. But as we were going into it, I do remember the panic that happened throughout the entire world related to funding and the economy and all of those factors. And in particular, because we work with so many Christian schools, and that's a big part of what we do is serve Christian education, there was this belief among the Christian school network that no one could afford to pay tuition anymore, and that enrollment was going to drop 15, 20% across the board, and schools were going to have to close. And I remember being on conference calls with groups of schools discussing this very issue. And then something crazy happened. Just the exact opposite happened because of the way the public schools sort of dealt with the pandemic. Even though people might have been in more economic tough times, they've decided to prioritize paying for Christian education, and enrollment grew by, in some cases, 10, 20%. And suddenly schools were overflowing with students and didn't know almost how to deal with that particular piece. Isn't that amazing?
and it's still happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And Skylar, one of the things too that I was a practitioner during the pandemic or the height of it, and I remember that panic moment when I realized all the planning we've done for the remainder of the year is pretty much out the window. And I remember being on Zoom calls with my team and thinking, guys, we don't get to do all the events that we do. All those touch points that we normally have with our donors, our big event that we would do every year, those aren't going to happen. We have to find ways to still meet that objective, but in a different way. And to your point about enrollment, absolutely. I mean, we saw that. We also saw a lot of the families that we currently had became needed recipients of tuition assistance. And so you had this assumption that your funding was going to go down, but that your need was going to increase. And we were just focused on that gap. I hate the term, but I don't know how else it is. We were focused on that gap. And what actually happened, to your point, Skylar, was that our donors got it. And they understood we have to help families get through this time. And so they stepped up to the challenge. And we did beyond what I would have ever imagined. But it wasn't because it was slick or fancy. We just went back to the fundamentals of how do we engage donors in a meaningful way.
I think it's really interesting that we saw it also with human services agencies and others that, the big thing was when they started to just go back to the basics and they started implementing some of these best practices that we're always talking about of just call your donors, talk to them, send them a little video on your phone. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be flashy. And I remember one of our clients was doing that and they were just getting overwhelming response just from the simplest of things. And it wasn't a big fancy event, it wasn't some big appeal, it was just those human touches. Yeah. And I think that is such a big thing that we have to remember that always works. Go back to that, and not just in times of trouble, but just go back to that relational aspect of what we do, and that's what people love.
So lots of lessons learned through the pandemic, and I would say that the pandemic wasn't exactly like other economic, struggles that we've had in this country in the past. Obviously, to bring us back to the things going on today, right? Breaking the silence on the economy, the impending recession that we're headed toward, inflation affecting the price of things, supply chain delays. And Sarah, I'm going to go to you with this question, and I'm going to ask you: are these really reasons to kind of for organizations to say maybe now's not the right time. But continuing to think of those things that get in people's minds, like for organizations that are thinking about building, cost of constructing buildings today has gone up crazy. I mean, more than inflation because of the certain materials and how hard they are to acquire. The delays in ordering things, like I only know because we're buying a new refrigerator. It takes 6 months to get a new refrigerator, and here we are. I know these are first world problems too, right? So, all right, I'm feeling a little silly right now.
But still a problem.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So to the board that's sitting back and wringing their hands and very concerned, they want to be good stewards. Are they saying, maybe we should wait a few years and let this storm pass, right? Kind of respond to that a little bit.
Well, I always go back to, no matter what the situation is, and right now that's what a lot of people are asking, but what's the need? Is your need urgent and compelling? Because if it is, then it shouldn't matter what's going on in the world. Does your mission require it? Then we need to do it, and we need to figure out a way to make it work. So I think that that's where we have to back up, because sometimes I think they get over their skis ahead of themselves and just in that worry space, and then going back to, well, what do we really need in order to make our mission work? And if that means that we've got to do a big transformational campaign because that's what we have to do in order to move the ball forward, then we got to figure it out. I think that's just, you have to go back to that fundamental reason of what are we doing and why, and really explore that. And if it's not compelling and urgent, then yes, maybe wait. But I think, I think most of the time it's, if you need it, then you're going to have to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah. So I agree, Sarah, 100%. And you posed it as to the board that's saying maybe we need to wait. My question would be, does ministry stop until you make that decision? Do needs stop arising? Do children stop having to be fed, or stop being fed or educated, or the homeless provided shelter? If all those things stop and everything exists in a vacuum, then yes, put your plans on hold. But if none of those things stop, and in fact, as these times tend to do, they bring those things even to the surface, they bubble up and they increase, then your mission just became more compelling than ever. And so instead of a preserving stance where we say, let's bury the treasure and protect it, and let's make sure it's there when we need it, maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe it's an opportunity to cast a bigger vision and to engage donors at a higher level where that need is too obvious for anyone to ignore.
Hear, hear. We hear the expression a lot of times, a rising tide raises all ships, but I would, make the opposite observation too. A sinking tide lowers all ships. And when the economy does go into tough times, sometimes the constituency that is served by our clients suffers worse. And I think you were saying that in different words. And so sometimes what might have been very important to a mission in normal economic times or good economic times becomes absolutely vital and much more urgent in tough economic times. And I love to sometimes pose the opposite question and say, look, if you can push this off 3 years, are you really, what's the message you're sending to your donors? That this $10 million building project that you had really isn't that important after all? And if you can say that, then I think you're going to have a lot of problem getting donors' attentions, period.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's just really important to remember that it's always about the impact and the mission. What are you trying to accomplish? And I do think I see a lot in board meetings. Boards don't want to talk about the difficult things and the scary things. And I think sometimes if you don't put that elephant in the room and just talk about it, then sometimes they just circle the drain forever and don't make that decision. And I just think there's a lot of work to be done in those boardrooms to talk about these issues and put it on the table and let's talk about it. What's really happening here with our organization.
So let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked about how missions might change their their story a bit around dealing with the elephant in the room. In this case, it's the economy and tough times and things that kind of concern boards. Let's talk about what practically actually does happen, because in all of our careers we've worked in this industry through plenty of down times. Okay, arguably the worst economic times of our lifetime was just 14, 15 years ago, when the housing bubble crisis hit our economy. So let's talk about what happens to philanthropy during those times, to help board members or other leaders who are contemplating kind of these issues. And either one of you can go first. I know we all have the same sort of story to tell here, but yeah.
Well, I think in general, Skylar, we've seen where it remains consistent. The donors that give at the level where they're making that kind of impact, they get it and they understand, and they're giving out of different pockets, if you would. Every donor matters. The donor that gives you $5 matters. The donor that gives you $50,000 a year matters, but they're very different people, and they give from different pockets many times. And I think that the opportunity here is to present that way. But we've seen, the data shows that philanthropy remains consistent even during difficult times, economically or world events or whatever it might be. That's really good news for people that are in the world of fundraising, because it's consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I remember working during that time, and I don't really remember being stressed about fundraising during that time. And I'm trying to look back, and we made our goals. We exceeded our goals during that time. And I just look back, and I think we get so consumed by the noise around us, the gloom and doom all the time on the news. And I think it's even worse now than it was then. But I just recall that we still were able to meet our goals, and donors still stepped up, and we were able to do it. So I don't really recall that it was, I think there was a lot of noise around us, but it ended up actually being just fine. So, and I think we've seen that through the last couple of years, that yes, maybe things change or they shift, or we have to pivot our strategies from time to time, but it ends up working out somehow. It always does. It just ends up working out.
And so that you don't take our word for it only, Giving USA is a publication that puts out numbers on American philanthropy every year, and they've done it every year for 55 or 60 years now. So there is a wealth of information to prove exactly what we're saying, that if you look at philanthropy, and let me do this so this is an upward graph for you to say, that philanthropy has very consistently climbed and outpaced inflation year over year over year, even during the toughest economic times that we've had. And you don't really see a blip during the times that you think we should. Now, of course, the counter to that is when we have an economic boom and the stock market's going through the ceiling, we don't necessarily see a crazy spike in increased giving either. I mean, philanthropy has just always been very consistent. And I think the lesson for every nonprofit organization, non-roast beef organization, to take into consideration in this kind of environment is just what you were saying earlier, Sarah and Angel, is stay the course. Yeah. Continue to tell your story. Continue to maintain those relationships. You will weather the storm. In fact, you have to consider the possibility that tons of other organizations who don't have good counsel might pull back and operate from a scarcity standpoint and be apologetic and so suddenly there's less competition for the philanthropic dollars sometimes in these times. Yeah.
And I don't think we should ever apologize for asking for money. That's just another thing.
Yeah,
Never apologize. Yeah. And I'm not sorry. Don't be sorry. Why would we ever apologize? Because that is basically saying that we don't believe what we're raising money for. So if we need that money to impact our mission, then it should be, an easy conversation. And we're matching up with the donors and matching their passion. So don't apologize. Yeah. I don't understand where that comes from.
It's easy to project our own
Yeah.
our own opinion, our own view
Yeah.
on a donor, and we deprive them of the opportunity to make that
Yeah.
decision for themselves. I mean, let's be honest. You're filling up your car. I'm looking at that the other day thinking, oh my gosh, this is right. It's easy to have that cloud over you. But to your point, Sarah, there is absolutely a great opportunity to engage those donors in a way that we don't ever communicate. Listen, I know it's tough times, but no, the mission still exists and it still matters and you still love it. Let's talk about how you can be a hero in this.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that we're not saying? We've intentionally not gotten political here because we know that our audience might be anywhere in that political spectrum. But we also know that today's environment is probably polarizing politically, and there are people probably angry on those two ends of the spectrum. Uncertainty as elections approach, whether you're in favor of the direction things are going or not in favor of the direction things are going. But I just want to weigh in on this because it's something we didn't mention and it is on people's minds, right? So we know uncertainty can cause that delay or reluctance to move sometimes as well. But I think the answer is the same, which is your mission important today? Will it be the day after the election? Then does it really matter who's the president or who's in control of Congress or anything like that? So some might still say yes. But not us. Thank you again for joining us, for breaking the silence. We hope we gave you something to take away from here. The key here is that there's not really any good sound reason to be reluctant if it meets the litmus test, which is this is critical to your mission. And if it's urgent and critical to your mission, then there's not really anything substantive that should get in the way of you proceeding with it. Certainly not the economy, certainly not in the practice and in the way that the donors have responded during tough economic times in the past. In fact, there's every reason to believe that you should be full speed ahead and proceed to chase those important projects that will transform your mission. So thanks again for your time today. And, we're so glad that you've given us a little bit of your time to take on this episode. And man, that bird is really loud. I'm just going to go ahead and name it. But anyway, oh, I got it. Coming your way. We'll see you again next time for our summer break series.
Hey there, hope you're enjoying the Summer Break series. We worked really hard to make these lighthearted and fun, but also we wanted to make them informative. And I think you'll find them really helpful. So share them with your friends, share them with your colleagues, other development professionals and nonprofit leaders that you know of. We really think it'll be helpful. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We'll be posting these there as well. In addition, you'll be getting emails when we send these out and push them out. But we really want them to be helpful and valuable. You'll also get to ask us questions, and our team members will be able to answer those questions for you wherever they are over the summer on their vacation as well. So summer break, great time. Hope you get rested. Hope you enjoy the videos. Let us know how we can help you.